Well, thank you guys for being here on this last morning. I know we're all a little voices rattled and sleep deprived, but that's exactly the way it should be at this point in the weekend. Before we start talking specifically, I think kind of the general idea of this panel is to talk about rules, creating rules for worlds that are maybe not of this earth. But then I also, Joanna and I were speaking earlier just about, I feel like any show you create, you're creating more rules, whether it's fantasy or not. So I would like to talk about that too, because I feel like that's applicable to anybody writing anything. So my first question, though, before we jump in, is just, do you remember growing up or as a kid a specific show that sort of took you to another place? And what was it about that show or that place that fascinated you?
Fantasy Island.
Oh my God, say that.
It's in the title. Fantasy is in the title.
Fantasy Island and Charlie's Angels. Those were my shows. Those were my jams, you guys. And they were both fantasy shows in their own way. But I just remember early on being like mesmerized and terrified, and just the idea that you could make a wish and that somebody could grant it, and that you could live and experience and come out, everybody always came out better or different, or somehow understanding that living that dream wasn't going to solve all their problems. Or it was some of the better parenting that I got, actually.
Just plop the kid right in front of Fantasy Island.
It taught me some things.
And Charlie's Angels is obvious. Come on.
Charlie's Angels was,
Game
let's
changer.
face it, utterly damaging to any child who wanted to have anything resembling self-esteem about her body. But other than that, they were pretty kick-ass, the Angels, and they were so pretty, and they were, I think it was probably a damaging show, but I loved it.
Which ironically, 3 badass chicks, and then you fast forward, you worked on Charmed, 3 badass chick leads.
I did.
So there, I'm not
I
saying
did.
that.
And on Charmed, there was no Charlie. There was no man pulling the strings. So that was progress.
So we've evolved, yeah.
Aaron Spelling, even. The land of Aaron Spelling evolved from Charlie's Angels, yeah.
What about you? What about a show that took you somewhere?
I would say one of the first shows was Lost in Space, and which is interesting now thinking back about it, because it's really about a family. So it had rules. It was, in space. It had Martians. It had robots. It had, all of that good stuff. But really, the central core idea of the show is about a family unit, how they work together, and what the dynamics are. And that's how I related to it. Was, the brother, sister, the parents, and kind of a mission of the week that was really fun and was an exploration and an adventure. But then getting back to the emotion of that group of people.
I wanted to be Charlie.
You kind of are right now.
I know. It's hard to stay sober in Austin. I'll just say that. Can I just say that? And if this was 10 tonight, I'd be really lively right now. But I think for me, before any of you were born, there was a TV show on called Wild Wild West. And that was, it was a fantasy show. And in those days, we wanted to be like the characters we saw on television. We didn't want to be on television, which is the difference between then and now. Yeah. But I love that guy. What was his name? Robert Conrad? I was actually pitching a show to CBS one time, and Robert Conrad was there in the waiting room. And we were there together, and I was like, oh my God, it's Jim West. He's right there. And
you took a selfie with him?
That was maybe before cell phones, but anyway. I had to go to the bathroom, which I always do before I go into those meetings, and I go in the bathroom, and then he comes in. And I'm like, oh my God, Jim West is right there at the next urinal, right next to me. So I'm standing there, and he's standing there, and I'm kind of not sure if I should look at him or what.
Where to look.
Or where to look.
Talk about like a Western showdown.
Yeah. So he kind of does a slit eye, thing that Anson Mount does now, looked over at me, and he goes, I almost got in a fight on the fucking freeway today. Oh, wow. Okay. And then he said, I was going to beat that guy's ass, too. I'm like, I got to go now. Nice to see you, Jim. Anyway, yeah,
You
so
are your character.
that's the guy I wanted to be, Jim West, with the little short jacket, and yeah.
Now, were you guys aware, speaking to your point about you wanted to be those people or those characters, like those characters, were you guys aware that someone had created that world for you? Or at what point did you know that you wanted to be part of the creation process of television and not just a viewer, but that you wanted to go to the point of actually like saying, hey, I want to be a part of making that?
This reflects the hangovers of everybody on this stage. Hello. Okay. If you had asked me when I was 8 what I wanted to do with my life, I would say that I wanted to be a movie star because I wanted to go on Johnny Carson and tell people that there shouldn't be war. So I knew what my calling was from a very young age. I just didn't understand exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew that I wanted to have a voice on television. I wanted to have a voice in the world. Thank God I didn't feel a need to be a movie star to do it, because they don't get to eat. But yeah, so it took me until I actually went to school. I went all the way. My degree is in acting. I was an actor until I was 27. So it took me until my senior year at Boston University's College of Fine Arts to take I took a playwriting class, and I was like, oh, like it was like. Oh, it was like I was a dry, cracked sponge and somebody dropped me in a bucket of water. It was like, oh, I can do this. And then it took me another 5 years to do it because I had to figure out a whole other thing. Yeah. But that's when I was in my 20s when I figured that out. What about you?
I feel like now it's like in order every time. No, I'm happy to. I found it pretty late. I would say. I feel so corporate-y saying this, but this is my story. I was a business major in college, and I read a lot. I was always reading. I read since I was, 6 years old. I just always had a book. I was up late reading.
Which is, you had an active imagination since you were a little kid, and that's part of it.
Yeah, and I was a latchkey kid, so I watched a ton of TV. That was kind of my babysitter growing up. I loved watching TV, but that was entertainment, and I grew up in Massachusetts, and that wasn't really an option to be a TV writer. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know that it was a job. I just knew that I loved TV, and I knew that I loved to read. So I, went about. I was working in business, and I ended up working at Disney in LA in a business job because that just seemed practical to me. And that's kind of I got a job. I was happy to get a job after college, and that's when scripts came across my desk, and I was like, what are these? Wait, these are the things the words that they're saying that goes into that box that people act out, and then I see it? Wait a minute. How do I get more of these things, And that's what I kept reading, and then, the creative department was like, well, you want more of those? In those days, it was a stack. Now it's in your iPad. But it was, look over there, and there's, stacks and stacks of scripts. You want to read any of those? Read those and tell us what you think. And I loved it, and that was when I was like, how do I get that job? So it was definitely a backwards way in, but thinking back, it really does make sense for what I do, because I read. Really what I do is reading, and that's really what I love to do. Yeah.
John Wirth.
Hello. I didn't know. I thought actors made up all that stuff on TV. And now that I work with them, I realize they think they do too. But then sometimes Charlie shows up. Yeah. And,
Puppeteers.
Yeah. What was the question?
Just at what point did you go from just being an audience member or liking TV or liking entertainment to saying, I want to be a part of creating that?
I was a school teacher when I was about 25 years old. And I was making $11,000 a year, living in a house with 5 other guys who were always eating my food out of the fridge, even when I put my name on it. And we've all been there, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I thought there's got to be a better way to make a living. Got to be a way to make more money. So maybe I'll be a poet. And, my wife will attest, she's had to suffer through a lot of poems, bad poems written for her. Yeah, so I guess it was about my mid-20s when I thought maybe I should try, if I'm going to do it, I should do it now. Yeah, that's my life story. That's the beginning of my life story in
I'm
Hollywood.
so on the edge of my seat right now.
Me too. I might have to go to the bathroom. I'm so on the edge of my seat.
Well, let's talk about then specific shows that you've worked on that specifically relate to fantasy and creating those worlds. And Joanna, you have a point of view coming from hearing these pitches and having to decide if a world has been set up in a way where you can clearly understand what show you're buying or what the passion project is of whoever's bringing it in and if it's going to be sustainable for your network or whatever. But when you're creating these shows or even writing on these shows, I guess, like we were talking about in the beginning, even if you're creating or working on a medical show, that show has rules that are defined by the world of working in a hospital. There are certain things that, doctors do or don't do. And, Hell on Wheels, if you're doing a show set post-Civil War with this guy, there are rules that you have to follow for, the time period and accuracy and historical context and stuff like that. But specifically on fantasy shows as a difference, when you're starting to create a world, what are the first steps when you get a kernel of an idea, when you're trying to flesh that out in order to bring it into somebody like Joanna? What do you got to make sure that you have in order to present that world to someone that's possibly going to buy your show?
I think that I have actually pitched and sold since Wonder Falls, which was so long ago. I did pitch and sell a fantasy show. It didn't go to It didn't even go to pilot. So I did it really well.
But she sold it.
I wrote the pilot. I pitched it to the wrong network. It was a show called Maybe Angels that I sold at CBS years ago.
Charlie's Angels.
See, right? It was an idea that I had after my dad died. The idea that that when super fucked up things happen to you, it's your angels who are trying to protect you from worse things. And so that was the idea. And I will say that I spent more time thinking about what the rules had to be when you're writing a show about living people and their angels that is irreverent and kind of dark and twisted. What I remember from my years on Charmed is that you just can't break your rules. Like, once you've established what the rules of time travel are in the world of Charmed, the amount of fucking hours that we spent being like, but can they do, wait, I don't understand, what was that rule again? Like, if they go there and they see something, then what happens?
Is it a collective job of everybody to keep track of that in the writer's room?
Or these are the rules that we have established. Yes, I know that other show established different time travel rules, but our viewers, these are the rules that we've established. And so that's what I think that, for example, in the fantasy world that is Grey's Anatomy, doctors do all the jobs that nurses do. Now, we established those rules, and then we started trying to break them when the nurses wanted us dead on a platter. But every show has fantasy elements to it, and largely, I think that you make an agreement with your viewers. These are the rules, and I'm going to stick to them. And when you start breaking your own rules, that's when there's a really big outcry and a backlash. Yeah. So, and when I was pitching, to answer your question, when I was pitching Maybe Angels, usually I just pitch the world of a show, and I pitch the characters, and I pitch sort of a shape for the pilot, and then I pitch a sort of some sample episodes. And I added a section in Maybe Angels of like, these are the rules, I can't remember what they were now, it was too long ago.
You are now, the CW has a ton of fantasy shows, arguably some of the bigger hit shows, and a lot of them based on pre-existing properties we were talking about, Arrow, Vampire Diaries, comic book material or books or whatever. Whenever somebody's bringing in, an original fantasy show, are you asking them to clearly outline the rules for you in the pitch, or is that something that you kind of absorb, or you make sure that you clearly know before the pitch is over, even if they haven't said it?
There's so many questions there. They're all really good questions. First of all, I do want to say that as a development executive, our first job is to be the person who's pitching, that writer's first fan. We really want, we want it to work. We want every pitch that comes in the door to work. We hope that they all work because we want to keep our jobs, and and they're people that usually we want to hear from. So with just keeping that in mind, we have a trust with that person who's coming in the door that they are going to hopefully know all of the rules, and there's only so much time in a room to discuss all of the rules. But I want to talk about a couple of things you said because they were really interesting. For us, we think of all of our new shows at the CW, we really like to think of them as worlds. We sort of like to think of everything as, plus 10% of regular, accessible sort of grounded world, meaning that there's a little element of wish fulfillment and fantasy. But not only that, but also just the color palette, the wardrobe, the music, it's a whole world unto itself that's stylish, that feels different than possibly, hopefully, other networks, and also other shows on our network. So those are sort of worlds unto themselves, whether or not they're genre or supernatural or period or just a grounded show. And then the other thing it's interesting is in terms of rules, and it's funny, Krista, because you mentioned time travel, and we have a lot of, you may watch some of our shows, hopefully, we have a lot of time travel on our network, which truthfully for me, whenever I hear a time travel show, I'm like, oh shit. And I'm sure boarding it, you figuring out the rules, but that's pretty interesting as a topic. And so we have actually been thinking about recently trying to figure out some universal, sort of no pun intended, rules for time travel, because all of our shows that have time travel have different rules. Sometimes it's like frozen face rule. It's like basically if you go too far down a road, then I call it frozen face. Go too far down a road, then everything sticks in its thing. Or it's like pebble in the river, where it's like, there's going to be a pebble in the river, it's going to wind around, and then eventually it'll find its way back to fate. And each show has a different set of rules, which is funny when you're watching all of the different shows.
And every network has a time travel show this
every
season.
Time travel.
It's going to be amazing to watch the different sets of rules that each writer.
And then you may know the famous Doctor Who, timey-wimey thing, which is like, who gives a shit? Let's just figure out where they're going. It's super fun. But I also want to say that in terms of rules, everything starts from character for us always, and we need the world, but we need the character. And so, the writers can adapt the rules. I think you're really right. You can't break the rules. But we have, you can never procreate, a vampire and a werewolf. That will never, ever, ever, ever happen. And then it's like,
you've learned
shit,
something
we
here
ran
today.
out of storylines. What if a werewolf and a vampire,
But you have to earn it. I
it.
don't know the show that you're referencing, but I remember when Buffy fell in love with Spike. Forgive me, I'm sorry, I have a kid now, so I don't have time to watch TV. But when Buffy fell in love with Spike, that was really breaking rules
Right,
of that
you
show.
can't do that.
But the amount of time that they spent earning that made it one of for me, the most powerful story they told. The emotionality of her resistance and of his
That Romeo and Juliet thing that they could
it
just
was so
play out.
good. It was so good. And so sometimes the magic is in the breaking of the rule, but you can't just willy-nilly break it. You have to earn it.
And sometimes it's sort of actor or character related or chemistry related. It's for weird reasons, like, the only person who can kill, this villain is, I'm not going to say who, you may not, and then you're like, that's not really a great actor. We don't really want to rely on 6 seasons of that person as to,
Or he became a
we have
series
forgotten
regular.
to tell
Something
you
else.
that, if they take the pill and wear the special watch and the tinfoil hat, you can kill the villain, So rules can be adjusted, but as Krista said, you have to earn changing them, and you have to have consequences. You really need, because the audience looks to those rules for play along. They really want to know, oh my God, this is, they can't break the timeline because then the green demons are going to come out or whatever it is. And then if the green demons don't come out or the consequences don't happen, then you sort of lose the audience.
Yeah, and you bring a good point up. I think just in what I've heard writers say in general is that it doesn't really help you to save your story ideas, because a lot of times once you actually get to something interesting, it opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. You know what I mean? So it's just, if that's what feels like naturally should happen next on the show, kind of right to that point, instead of being like, oh, but we were thinking about doing that next season. Well,
Never
sometimes
save anything.
yeah, exactly. Nothing is sacred. John, a question for you. In terms of all these breaking rules, not breaking rules, was there ever a time on a show that you wrote on or worked on where it became a decision in the room, okay, we're going to break a major rule, or we're going to go against something we've set up for a specific story impact?
Whenever you get desperate, you're looking to break a rule.
Yeah.
Really. I think, probably. But just to address the rule thing,
Yeah.
a couple things on rules. I think, sadly, I think rules are a little bit like exposition in television. With all due respect, Joanna,
Let's hear it.
sometimes executives are more interested in what the rules are than writers. And I think if you're doing your job in a writer's room, certain rules start to bubble up and present themselves, and just sort of instinctively, if you've spent any time in that room, this is a rule, a quote-unquote rule of the show. And for me, rules are better if they're underground rather than above ground, so that we all know the rules and we're all playing by the rules. And it was only half joke. If you're desperate, you might have to change the rules. You find out two actors don't have chemistry, and suddenly there's a rule about that, But I also think keeping it simple, the fewer rules you have, the better, because then you're not getting gummed up. Time travel's a hellhole no one wants to go down. So we lived in that hellhole on Sarah Connor Chronicles, because that was all about, time travel. But if you've ever seen Heaven Can Wait, the Warren Beatty version, that's the best demonstration of rules I've ever seen. It was so simple. Warren Beatty played Joe Pendleton. He gets bopped into Leo Farnsworth's, magnificent bathroom with a dead guy. The dead Leo's in the bathtub, and Anthony Mason is in there, Mr. Jordan, and Warren Beatty's doing his, crazy Warren Beatty impression, and he says, he goes, "You're Leo Farnsworth, Joe," and Warren Beatty looks in the mirror and says, "Wait, but I see myself." And he goes, "That's right." He goes, "Wait, so when I look in the mirror, I see me, but everybody else sees Farnsworth." "That's right, Joe."
And those are the rules.
And that was it. It was so simple. And then it just let everybody go. You could just enjoy the movie. So, yes, there are rules in every show, whether it's a fantasy show or not. And, we had, oh my God, he threatened to hire a hitman, literally, because he said, "I know people who could kill you," Don Johnson. And when the show was over and I was
Nash
leaving,
Bridges.
I was like, why is he calling me to tell me he knows people who could kill me? What did I do? And because I had a lot of stuff on paper that came from him, and I had written down, some friends of mine sold a show with Richard Dreyfuss, so I wrote down all the rules of working with Don Johnson and created a big folder that was the Richard Dreyfuss rule book, and I had some amazing stuff in there that were the rules, the actor rules, which is a whole other level of rules.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Like Don Johnson would not run on camera. He would not eat on camera. If you ever saw that show, he had the fancy yellow car, and they would always go after the bad guy, and then he'd slam on the brakes and do like a 360, and then he'd turn to Cheech and say, "Go get him, Joe." And Cheech would jump out of the car and chase the guy around for 10 minutes, and then Don would pull up, and the guy would not be looking and crash into the car and fall into the back seat. Don would say, "You're under arrest, Bubba." But he had a lot of rules, and I'd written them all down, and I think he saw them in my office one time, so he threatened to kill me if I ever
We're
told
so
you
happy
guys
you're
about
here
it.
today. We're so happy you're here today. That's such an interesting point that I didn't even think about. I mean, do you have any stories of I mean, we don't have to say names or anything, but I'm just saying.
Who wants to kill you, Krista?
I'm just saying more anecdotal examples of stories or rules or characters that were killed off or rules that had to change just because of even just something that wasn't just a circumstance. Someone got pregnant or so,
I have so many stories that we would be here all day. I think that there are two really important, everything he just said is important and true. That rules have to be limited, that you can't focus too much on what they are when you're creating. And you can't need to say them over and over and over again. And so they have to be super simple. There can't be a lot of caveats to your rules. That's a lesson I learned a painful way. It's like, this is the rule, but then this is the exception, this is the exception. Eventually you end up, when you're writing many seasons of a show, you end up making exceptions to the rules, but you can't lay them all out in anybody's exposition at any one point. And then there are the actor rules. And this is one of the things that nobody wants to know. Like, they think they want to know, but the fandoms want it all to be my fault, or all to be our fault when characters behave in certain ways, or characters leave the show, or suddenly they were promised a certain storyline, and then suddenly that storyline didn't happen because one of those actors is gone. And there's a huge amount of press. There's a machine that is designed to protect the actors. It's the old Hollywood talent machine. There's a machine that's designed to protect the decisions that the actors make. And so fans want to look to lay blame, but it's almost always the actors, you guys. And that's the truth. But I'll tell you some of the rules on Charmed. Oh my God, it's been long enough. Has it been long enough?
You started, am I right? You started as a story editor on Charmed?
Yes, it was my second job. I came there season 3. I was there for 3 years. And
8 seasons of that show?
The show went for 8 seasons.
Okay.
I was there 3, 4, and 5, and I went back and did an episode season 6 because I was getting married and Brad offered me some money. I was like, I need a dress. I'll come do it. I had a great time. He was an incredible mentor to me early in my career. He really, Brad Kern, understands story and just was a great teacher to me. And he continues to be such a diplomat when talking about the show in a way that I'm maybe going to break right now, but I'm not going to tell you the worst stuff. I'm just going to tell you that when I first came to that show, what was incredible to me, the rule, was that when I went to casting, there was a line on the wall in the back, and what had little dots on it, and what it was a secret height measure, because those actresses, the Prue, Piper, and Phoebe, the originals, are somewhere between 4'10" and 5'2" between the 3 of them. And I have tremendous respect for most of those actresses, and I will name no names. I don't know who it was who didn't want you to know that she was 5 feet tall, but we weren't allowed to cast actors who were over like 5'6". So these actors would come in with like Juilliard resumes, and they would just act their faces off, and we'd be looking at the line and be like, and then we cast Julian McMahon, but it was okay because he was Julian McMahon. Right. But you see how much taller he looks. And then we wrote an episode once because they wouldn't run, because they're always in 5-inch heels because they're 5 feet tall. And so I remember being like, they have to chase the demons. And so we wrote an episode where Prue came in with a bag of sneakers. She's like, okay, you guys, we're going to run in sneakers from now on. And so it was like she was laying out the sneakers. And like for one episode, they ran in sneakers. And then they're like, well, it's hot in LA. And and then the other thing about the exposition is that they just were done with it. They were done with delivering the rules, the expository rules. And I have a vivid memory of writing like a speech, like it was like a monologue. And I thought I had I had laid all the pipe, everything you needed to understand these demons. And we got the dailies back. It was a paragraph. It was like a paragraph, and it was like pithy, but there were like 5 rules in it. And the actress had taken this paragraph, and this is what I got on the dailies. Like, if the paragraph was like, you guys, if we run down the street and the demons jump out in front of the doorway, we're gonna have to use this spell because they won't respond to fire and they won't respond to ice, but maybe they'll respond to my high heels. Like, but what I got back on the dailies was, you guys, don't use fire. Every take, but there were so many rules that people needed to understand, like the rest of the episode, that I was then in my office writing new scenes for the guest demons of the week to deliver.
I thought you couldn't use
when they jump out at us. They shouldn't. Hopefully, they won't use fire.
Right? Like, quick, get into the set. We have those demons for one more day. And then we learned, like, listen, it's valid. These are talented actresses. They're tired of delivering bad exposition. Sure. Give it to the guest stars. So then we started writing it for the guest stars because
they're happy to have lines. I mean,
they're happy to have lines.
I'm appreciating that show more by the second.
By the way, I'd like to now give the network impression of what we know
yes,
about
yes,
all
your
that
side,
behind
yes,
the scenes,
yes.
because it's really important and strong. It would be like, everything's fine. And we go, cool! I love that episode. So in terms of the behind the scenes stuff, we're very fortunate to be very protected from that stuff, I would say, for the most part. And we're happy to have a great show. And we say, like, you changed the rules because now they're all going to run in high heels. We go, that sounds like fun. Sure. A lot of chaos behind the scenes.
I was doing a cop show. I can't say which one took place in San Francisco. And, and I started noticing in dailies that our star was always in kind of, when he'd go to a crime scene, like in a store or something, he'd always be positioned in front of the door with that "how tall are you" thing on the wall. And I kept looking at it going, wow, is he that? I don't think he's that tall, is he? And then episode after episode, he'd be by that thing. And I said, I just don't think he's that tall. I really don't. And then I found out that they would lower that thing down and he would stand in front of it. So people would go, oh shit, that guy's tall. You know? Yeah.
This is so fascinating because, I mean, you create so much, or you put so much time and energy and effort in creating, I mean, obviously when you pitch a show, nobody's cast yet for the most part, into creating these minutia of rules a lot of times, especially if it's a world that's completely fictitious. And then other people come and join your vision, and it's going to shape and shift, and you know, all of these things are real issues on the day that you have to deal with, and still deliver a show that fans want to see, and the expectation that you've set up for whatever show you're on. Listening to you talk about Charmed and the re-explaining of the rules made me think of something. You know, that was during a time where Netflix wasn't a thing, which we talked about just the other day, how you said there's a whole new generation watching Charmed because of it being on streaming. But it made me think of something in terms of just the rules, in that, you know, nowadays we can DVR, we can rewatch, pause, on demand, watch an episode over and over at our whimsy. But when that show originally aired, you were week to week just catching an episode, and you couldn't really rewatch it unless you VHS recorded it. So the re-explanation of rules was, I think, probably more important then in a show like that, because if new people are coming in or if people are missing an episode, there's not this like, oh, well, I'll just tonight watch the first 4 or 5 and I'll catch up, or I didn't really understand that, let me rewatch it, and like, oh, I get it. Like, so do you guys find now in the era that we are with this sort of like the ability to, I guess, scrutinize to the nth degree rules that you've set up or things, or have fans point out, wait, that doesn't make sense because of, you know, that it's sort of changing how the dynamic of how you work in a room?
You know,
The rewatchability of something, you know?
yes, it changes the conversation in the writer's room. When fans can watch and rewatch and binge and re-binge and watch them all back to back, it does affect how you tell the stories. Yeah.
What about you from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we have a huge social media presence, so we have a lot of direct feedback with our fans who are just sort of, rabid for information about the rules of our shows. So we often, there have been a few times where fans have found, I guess I'd say maybe
A rule
tiny
being broken?
holes in the rules that we
Yeah.
like to call Easter eggs, which are like, we planted that one on purpose, and you caught it, and you're gonna find out
You're
next
special.
season why that. Yeah, but for us,
You're a real fan.
You're a true fan. You get a sticker and a check, and your thing. But for us, it's more conversation, So the more they can watch and rewatch stuff, it's great because we really embrace our fans and their feedback, and want to know what they're thinking. And if they catch breaking rules, or if they have questions about stuff, or they rewatch stuff and find other things and they're not consistent, for us that's just more talk and more conversation, and that's always good.
Yeah. John, a question for you with Sarah Connor. I mean, something like that where it's coming off of this hugely successful film franchise. What was it like working on that show, and were there certain limitations and or freedoms that you found because a previous set of rules had already been established? What was it like sort of taking that into the television, or working on that in the television space?
Well, the good news there was my attitude was everybody knows what this story is,
Right.
so let's not waste a lot of time telling them what they already know. I think that's a trap we sometimes get into. We want to tell people what they already know, and particularly as what you were just talking about, people can look at these things over and over again, and I think there's a sort of a frustration level if they're being told what they know over and over again. But so we just were trying to tell the human story in that show, and where it really got difficult is when we started dealing with the Terminators and people coming through the time portal, and how did that happen, and I wrote an episode where Richard Schiff was in it, and he played a watchmaker or something from the future, and it all took place in a container box, and which I felt like I feel like I'm in right now, actually. But that was an effort to sort of keep everything contained and sort of not have to deal with how he got in that box, because it was too much. And I remember really struggling with, I'm sorry, I can't remember the details on what happened there, but I was struggling with trying to explain it because it was a really rule-heavy thing. And we were all struggling. And then, thank God, one day Josh Friedman walked in and he said, I got the answer. And I said, what is it? And he said something like, you don't have to worry about that whole thing you're worried about because it never happened. I went, right. You're right. We're in the box. It never happened. So that, thank God, somebody had a brain. I think he ate a lot of sushi, so I think that's why he was able to think like that so clearly about rules. But yeah. What was your question?
I wanted to hear I wanted to hear you in a box. That was the answer I wanted. As we kind of get to the point where I want to open it up to questions, I guess my final just general question is, thematically maybe, or what is it about the fantasy genre that you think, I mean, arguably Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, like the shows on CW are arguably some of the biggest shows on television, just regardless of their genre, they just happen to be fantasy. What do you think is it about this genre specifically that allows for this such rabid fandom, or just makes for such a popular television watching experience? I mean, is it just because there's this level of escapism that people are allowed to experience every week by going to these different places, or what do you think makes the fantasy genre so big and popular?
I think that television is for women what sports is for men. This is my theory. I can't speak to that. I don't know because I'm not a part of the fantasy fandom. Although I'm a little bit obsessed right now with Orphan Black. Like
There
I
you
always
go.
have one.
So you can speak to it as a I mean,
but-
why, what is it?
I mean, I love the show. I think she's a fucking genius, like on a Meryl Streep level. I
Correct.
watch that show and can't believe what she's doing.
You're there for the performances.
I lose sight of the fact that it's not 9 actresses all the time. I don't understand how she hasn't won every single award. And talk about rules and storytelling. They are busting that shit out. They are doing that so well, it shocks and annoys me. That's when I know that TV is good, when I'm annoyed. Also, Mr. Robot, I'm obsessed with, and angry. I'm angry about it. It's too. I don't know how they got it on TV. I'm annoyed. So, so I'm a fan. But like I'm a fan with my boyfriend in the living room. But what I'm saying about it being, and so the women and men isn't fair, but it's like you see sports fans and they're crazy and they're rabid and they scream like the TV can hear them, and nobody thinks they're weird. Right. Nobody judges
My
them.
husband does it constantly at
They're
full
betting
volume.
money. They're fantasy football. I was married to a man who spent more time on fantasy football than any other single thing in his life.
Fantasy football.
Fantasy football. They're building a team. Nobody thinks it's weird. Nobody asks why they're obsessed. Nobody talks about it. But we get that way about our TV shows, and everybody's like, wow, those fans so nerdy. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, is human emotion not acceptable to you? There has to be a ball involved for us to be passionate about a thing. Like, people ship relationships in television the way people ship quarterbacks. And it's just like apples and oranges. Like, this is my jam. This is what I'm passionate about. Yeah, so I don't know why fantasy more. I don't even know that fantasy more than anything. I mean, I got more letters about, Meredith and Derek,
Sure,
or
yeah.
actually Izzy and Denny than anything I've ever done. But I think that the fandoms find each other, and I think it's often because they've been called like nerds or something in high school, so they have to bond together for safety
find
and
my
numbers
people.
and packs. I'll find my people. Yeah. It's like the way theater kids, like I had to find my people in high school. They had to be the people who like to sing in the halls. Those are my people. I don't like sports. So I think that the internet has made it possible for nerds, and I say that in the most respectful sense, and I am one, for us to find each other and to bond together and talk about the thing that we like that doesn't
It's
involve a
okay
ball.
to yell passionately about this thing.
It
that we
involves
love.
a fireball and a demon, but it doesn't involve
But
a
they
football.
can't use fire. And you've got Supernatural, literally the show that's, 12 seasons now? I mean, that's just bananas. What do you think for you? I mean,
By
for
the way,
you
you
guys?
named, Krista, the 2 shows that I would love to have on the CW network: Orphan Black and Mr. Robot. Those are like, I don't know how I missed. I didn't even have the opportunity, but if I did, I would have loved to have those.
I would have loved to have thought of them and written them. I wouldn't have. But that's why I'm mad.
Well, I'll say the networky answer because I'm here. Why not?
That's who you are?
Here I am. I would say the 3 main reasons for fantasy shows is, one, wish fulfillment, as you said. I mean, it really, we live sort of regular lives and are, grounded, and we have responsibilities, and, we have things we have to do every day, and, there's some wish fulfillment in, living a completely different life. And sometimes it's even, I always talk about it even on shows like Lost, where, you crashed on a desert island, but there's wish fulfillment there that, you don't have to check your phone. You know what I mean? You don't have to, go to work. You're just like looking for bananas, trying to find food, and that's sort of an element of wish fulfillment in fantasy. And then, the other one, how many did I do so far? That's wish fulfillment, heightened stakes, because it's like, holy shit, I gotta save the fucking world. You know what I mean?
Anything is possible,
normal
really.
people don't have to do that. You know what I mean? Or like I have 10,000 warriors running at me. Like normal people don't have to do that. And then
Speak
for us,
yourself.
what'd you say?
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, just for 1 or 2 of my shows. And then for us, the marketability. It really is just a big idea, supernatural genre, not the show. I mean the show also, but anything supernatural, anything heightened fantasy. They're very marketable. You put them on a billboard. At the end of the day, people notice them. But then I just want to riff off of one thing that Krista said, which is, and also a question that you had about Supernatural, which is character. For us, really why you're there for Supernatural for all those years is a bromance. It's just the brothers. I mean, those guys are absolutely adorable. They're super funny. They love each other, and as you may or may not know, and like they're best friends in real life. You want to be a part of that friendship. Vampire Diaries, that's a love triangle, and that's also a bromance, so really it's what's at the center of it that makes it work. It's, we need marketability, we all love, sort of wish fulfillment in TV, that's why we watch TV, but at the end of the day, we're there for whoever the core characters are, and if we're not interested in, those central family relationships or romances, then the show's gonna fall apart, no matter how cool it is,
I should have been sitting over there because this is a tough act to follow. You guys
But it's so we're always
there,
just like,
but-
and then there's John.
Yeah, there is a male side to the fantasy thing.
Yeah.
So when I'm watching Orphan Black, I'm thinking the Vikings are not playing very well this year. And if I was 40 years younger, 5 inches taller, not married, in a place where I could be introduced to that woman, and she had any interest in guys like the fantasy me, I could be with 8 of her. That would be amazing. So that's how we do, right, guys?
But that's true. I mean, there is an element of just that, like, that sex appeal too that sometimes you get to bring into these, characters that you create from other worlds. Well, let's open it up to a couple questions as we wrap it up. Does anybody have any questions for our panel? Yes.
Oh yeah.
Shoot you in the face? I was there.
Yeah.
I watched that panel.
Yes, that happened. I got in a fist fight with Craig T. Nelson too.
And he seems like such a calm man, right? So surprising.
My wife, who's here, would say, "What's the common thread in all this?" It's you. Now I have a thing with TSA agents. Like I was trying to go on vacation and almost got arrested. And then I went to pick up a friend at the airport, and the TSA lady was like, "We got a guy here, he's really a problem, he won't move his car." I just got here. What? My wife said, "See, you, common denominator." What was your question? Why do I fight with people?
She's fearing whether she should be a writer.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure Krista's been in a lot of fights.
I have, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever managed any physical. I haven't had physical fights with writers or actors, but I have. But we do all receive death threats now that the internet is. I mean, we all receive
From
death
strangers.
threats. Yeah, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna like. We've all had to unlist our phone numbers and our addresses and things because fans are rabid, and whether they mean it or not, we receive actual death threats. And then, writers are passionate people. And, we find the story often in the writer's room. There's a lot of acting out and a lot of remembering of our deepest pain and talking about it, and you're pitching your heart out, and somebody will be like, I'll be like, and then this, and then somebody will go, well, what, or you know what if this? And you're like, oh, I'm gonna fucking kill you. I just opened my heart and bled on the table, and you were like, but what about, you guys, are we gonna order lunch? Oh, you and me.
And then there's the cone of silence thing in a writer's room, like cone of silence. And then you're copied on an email with some other jackass who's told the world the story you just told them,
Right.
And you're like, what happened to cone of silence,
Silence. Or some asshole sits on a stage in Texas and tells the secrets of the show after there was a cone of silence. statute of limitations?
Listen, don't let this ruin any of your aspirations to be writers, okay? You may not, you will live very prosperous lives, okay?
Listen, we are passionate. We are, Hollywood is a town full of artists. It's a commerce town, but artists who want to tell stories, whether they're actors or writers or directors or editors, we are artists. We are passionate. We care deeply, and so I'm largely joking about the fights in the writers' room. There have been very few times. There have been 1 or 2 times where I've had to go and sit down with somebody and be like, "Do you actually want to kill me?" But yeah.
One more question, yeah, right here.
This is more a question for Joanna, because you said you read a lot of books as a kid, but if you guys have answers to this too. There have been a lot of fantasy book adaptations, like TV shows recently, like Game of Thrones, Shadowhunters recently. Are there any book series that you, like fantasy book series that you read maybe as a kid or maybe recently that you think you would love to do a adaptation or love to see an adaptation of?
Yes, but I can't share them here because I'm currently trying to option them.
Krista and I,
So keep your paws off them. And
Krista and I would steal them if she said anything.
I still read, and those are the sort of the really fun ones to get are just the, books passed from friends who aren't even in the business. My mom is a big reader, and she's like, you should think of this for a series. And we're lucky to. That's another part of my job that I love is agents and book publishers sending us material that might make a good series and not having the time to read them all. They sort of stack up next to my bed. I read like 20 pages and then I'm like, shit, I gotta read another book, and then they all stack up. So yes, I mean, the answer that I'm going to, the part of your question that I'm going to answer is yes, I definitely have books that I would like to adopt into series, but I'm not going to tell you which ones they are.
Because she's trying to do it, y'all. All right, let's do one more question.
If you
and
have
we'll
any,
wrap it
let
up.
me know.
Yeah. Let's go way in the back.
Hi, so my question's for Joanna. Specifically with the CW, you guys have something unique with Berlanti, because you now have 4 shows that are interconnected. And without giving spoilers, Flash season finale kind of had something that affected that entire universe. How do you deal with that? Is that something you guys plan out? Like they let you know, okay, we're gonna do something here, it's gonna affect all of the other shows, because it used to be rules were just contained within one show, and that's really easy, but now that you have that, and even with Vampire Diaries, you have Vampire Diaries and originals that can affect each other.
Cross-pollinating of rules, yeah.
So how do you have, when something that big happens, is there a process that they let you know so you're like, okay, we're gonna make this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, there's definitely a process. I think one of the benefits of having, Berlanti be part of a lot of our shows is the fun that he can have and we can have with kind of cross-pollinating all of those, whether it's obviously just crossover shows, and we even crossed over with Supergirl on another network, which now is on, is coming to the CW now, which was really rare to do that, but they're just both Berlanti shows and they can make it happen, and it's publicity for both, so why not? So that is a rare kind of benefit. Planting spin-offs, we have a lot of conversations about that too, because it's a new show, so we have to treat it like, a pilot and really pay attention to what the episode is where we're introducing a new character who we're thinking might be part of, a spin-off. So all of those discussions, are had, and those people, the DC people, the Berlanti people, all across the board, their brains think in that way, to what's sort of next, and they have kind of a plan. They want to keep their business running, and so we're fortunate. They're really strategizing, I think, for the next number of years what might work, and sometimes those don't always work. I mean, we've had those too, where we think that certain characters are going to spin off, and then for whatever reason that doesn't work. But it is in terms of having, I don't know, you might probably, there's a name, mega producers, or what would you call that? Mega producers. It's weird, I get it probably from the outside of having so many shows from the same Uber producer, but that's probably the greatest benefit of it too. Good question. Thank you for your question.
All right, I think we're out of time, unfortunately, but thank these guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out so early.
Yeah.